Have you ever stopped to think if the way you raise your sons compared to your daughters is different? A new report says that old-school masculinity, including traits like competitiveness and aggression, could be damaging our boys, with generations of younger men under constant pressure to conform. So, we are all mums of boys. Are we raising them in the best possible way?
I don't know. I mean, I've made some huge mistakes as a mum, but I've done some things right. I obviously don't have daughters, so I can't compare how I would have raised daughters. They had very different male role models. They had their grandpa Vin, who often used to come downstairs in a dress dressed as Shirley Bassey. So they had that influence. They've got their dad, Tim, who is very much sort of northern upbringing, sort of quite macho dad in a way, but with a sensitive side. And then they've got their southerner stepdad, Lincoln, who is the worst patient. He has man flu worse than anybody else, do you know what I mean? Because I do think there's a north-south divide, and I think the southerners won't thank me for it, but I do think there's a gung-ho-ness about the northern men when they're poorly. But it's interesting that apparently this survey is about toxic masculinity. I've actually seen a shift in that, especially in the mental health world, which I work quite as a sort of our ambassador for mental health because of my own problems. And we certainly are seeing a shift in the way that men feel much more able to talk about their mental health issues. I know that there is still male suicide, and I know that we have a long way to go. But I don't think these days we're living in a world where big boys don't cry. I think that big boys can and do cry. I mean, you see, my dad is incredibly sensitive. He cries at adverts. He always has. He's a real softie. And yet his dad was very, very strict and was very, you chew your food 60 times and you don't cry and you don't do this. And yet, really, he went completely the other way. So it's difficult. I think that you just do the best you can. I mean, it'd be interesting to talk to you girls about the difference between the boys and the girls. I've raised two very, very sensitive boys. And as I say, me and their dad, we made lots of mistakes, but we did raise two boys who are sensitive, not only to family issues, but to world issues.
You're totally right. You're totally right. It's a generational thing, and also it depends on your family unit. You know, we understand what it's like as well to come from a blended family, which is very different. You've got an adopted family. We've all got incredibly different scenarios for
And
our
I've got
boys.
girlfriends who were brought up not to cry, not just boys, and not to talk openly about things.
I mean, my dad, culturally, Asian men, they're brought up not to show emotion. I never saw my dad cry, ever.
Really?
Even when his mum had died and he couldn't go back to Kashmir to go and see her, just not shed a tear. So my little boy, Zach, he's very much like Steve. Steve's 54, so he's of a generation where he was brought up to be manly and masculine, but Steve's really sensitive, and so is Zach. But I don't see Zach being any less of a boy. You know, he shows his emotions, and we kind of celebrate it.
Well, I think what's nice, I think what's nice nowadays is that boys are being taught that it's fine to be more open, it's fine to be who you want to be. I haven't treated Shane any more, different than I've treated Jake, but they're completely different people. Jake is more sensitive, whether that's the artistic songwriting side of him, I don't know. Shane's more a lad, but even now Shane will say to me, do you know what, Mum? He said, I cry at everything now. Like an advert can make me cry. I know, and that's turning 30 and becoming a dad. Everything becomes.
I think my worry, Andrea, is with the advent of femininity. We're all, very proud feminists at this table, and this show celebrates women and what we've achieved. But I think what worries me is that men, a lot of the times, and it does worry me about the boys, they're not quite sure where the levels are because we confuse them. Because I know for a fact there's certain areas that I want my man to be a man. I shall say no more because it might put people off their dinner. But, and I think the boundaries that we set out are quite difficult for them. Should they open a door? Should they not open a door? Should they stand up? I still like chivalry. I know you do the same. It's a confusing time.
And Sarah, you feel the same, don't you? That you like a man to be a man.
Well, yeah,
and
in
certain rooms,
and Steve,
like Denise was saying.
Yeah, and because Steve, in our marriage, he says to me sometimes, "You're so independent. You can, you don't need me to look after you, but there's a part of me as a man that wants to protect you and wants to look after you."
Yeah.
And I think sometimes he feels frustrated that he doesn't have the ability to do that.
But don't you think in some ways that's our fault? Like or this generation now, that we just confuse them.
Yeah.
Because we go, well, I want to go out to work 20, as much as you and I want to do this and I want to do that. why didn't you open that door for me?
Yeah, exactly.
Why aren't you fixing that? You know,
Yeah.
that's your job. It's like we want it all, but then we kind of want them to just fit in when we want them to fit in.
Confusing.
It's so confusing.
It's confusing.
Yeah, it is confusing.
Andrea, what about you and Finley? Because obviously you've got a very close relationship with your son.
Yeah, and similar to you two, I've got a boy and a girl. So in terms of how I raise them as people. I don't raise them as a boy or a girl. I raise them in terms to how their personality responds. It's so difficult because we pride ourselves on being strong, independent women who lead by example. And then
But we still need to lean on a man sometimes, don't we?
Yeah, we are our own worst
If
enemy
you've got
sometimes.
one.
Yeah. Listen, you get to watch what you like on the telly.
That's true.
And to get your pygmy goats.
That's true.
You're never lonely with a pygmy goat.
No.
That's a saying.